We are discussing the Pigford cases that resulted in billions of dollars in government compensation to African-American farmers who had been discriminated against by the Department of Agriculture for decades. At issue was the USDA's credit department fraudulent allocation of farm loans, debt restructuring, and crop payments. These types of government loans and subsidies are an essential part of the American agricultural business. On average, USDA subsidies total $11.8 billion annually paid directly to American farmers. Who gets these federal dollars and for what types of crops has outsized influence on the food that is grown and available in the country and the hands that do that work? So, I think this is part of what I wanted to point out here, Hank, is farmers getting the help of government is standard practice. This is, in fact, how farmers farm in this country, and African-American farmers were systematically shut out of it. Is that the story we need to know?
Yes. Let me make several quick points.
Sure.
It's hard to farm without government help. White folks can't do it. And they expect black folks to be able to do it without it. That's one.
Yeah.
The second point is you have to understand that the massive nature of this discrimination, it wasn't that most people got a chance to apply. Many times when you went in, they said there are no more applications. They said that there are no more funds. Come back next week, and you come back next week, and they send you back again. It was just massive because there was a plan to all of this. The third thing is that it did great damage to, first, it did damage to people who were farming. They could no longer farm. People who wanted to farm did not get a chance to farm. It did damage to families because the families would break down. People couldn't work, couldn't make a living. They left and went to Chicago and Detroit and other places. It broke down communities. It's just a massive nature of the destruction on it. And finally, I want to say, they characterize this sort of as the black farmer's case because that's a highly charged racial term, but it's really 5 different cases. Right. It's a women's case, a Hispanics case, a Native American case, and 2 African American case. The second Pickford case is interesting to know that the United States Congress now passed a law authorizing this. Then it passed a law appropriating the money. Exactly. And in that, it required multiple kinds of audit. There are just layers and layers of protection to make sure that the fraud was, if not wiped out, held to a minimum. There's very little fraud in that, in any kind of way you can look at it. But when they say black, then it colors the whole thing.
Yeah, Karen, the state senator's point feels to me like precisely what was going on, at least in the tone of this article, which was the sense that once you define it as black farmers and you have this African-American president under whom it all happens and the language of the spigot and the federal government. So I so appreciate this language of it's hard to farm without federal government help. Not even white folks do it. In fact, it's hard to do lots of things like drive on roads or buy houses. But when white folks do it, we make it invisible. When black folks do it, we give it these derogatory names like welfare or reparation.
Right, that's right. And those terms become demonized, right? And it goes, again, into this theme of who's deserving, who's not deserving, lazy, hardworking. Well, all farmers are hardworking. Yes. I don't care what color you are.
There's no lazy farmers.
Life. And, the other piece of this, again, this idea of this discrimination, it's happening now. We were just talking about this. There are how many cases of discrimination, again, on home loans, on now the government is investigating auto loans. So to some degree, you almost want to say, well, are you really suggesting you don't think that it happened, that discrimination doesn't happen? It's still happening. We know it's still happening. And again, owning a home and passing that home on to your family, that is supposed to be a fundamental part of the American way of life.
Right. It's one of the other things that we saw this week, right, was those reports about the evaporation of black wealth in the context of this economic downturn. And it's a reminder that evaporation doesn't happen accidentally. It is the result of systematic policy.
Well, and also the language on this was like the 47% video, right? This is the sort of new Republican theory of the voter, right? Or at least of the Democratic voter, right? That the only people who are beholden to the government and sort of mind controlled by them with these gifts are going to vote for Obama, and that explains their sort of supremacy in the polls. the same theory is not applied to the military-industrial complex, corporate capital. I mean, all the sort of tranches that get government aid or benefit from the government.
And in fact, go ahead, please.
There was a lot of people in the USDA who were pushing this. And they've been pushing it for years, and finally they got somebody like at the New York Times to end up doing this. And I think it's important to know that out of all of this discrimination, not a single person was ever fired. Not a single person was ever demoted. Not a single person was ever investigated. The only person that was fired was Shirley Sherrod. And she was innocent, and she was black. And she hadn't done anything wrong except tried to help this white farmer and got fired.
Right. No one was held fundamentally accountable. I'm thinking of not this book, but the title of your previous book, which is When Affirmative Action Was White. And this idea that there's simply this invisibility of government support until it becomes racialized.
The vast majority of help to agriculture these days goes to big corporate farms, often either not to grow things or to grow things which are inefficient. We have a public policy structure that has largely left out those near the bottom of the social structure. It's not just discrimination against African Americans or Native Americans or Latinos on the land. It's discrimination against small farmers, against people who are trying to eke out a living under difficult circumstances. And we have a deep, deep bias in our public policy that dates back, unfortunately, now many, many decades.
Thank you to State Senator Hank Sanders. I so appreciate the advocacy and work that you have done and continue to do. The rest are staying for more, and when we come back, we want to introduce everyone to an incredible new program and the remarkable man leading it. For many of our veterans, the mission continues.